Welcome today to a very unique presentation on researching your family military history. Before we start today's program, please allow me to update you on an upcoming program. Mark your calendars for March 20th for a presentation on Women of the Hermitage by Marion Brown, 1770 to 1970. Marion was a part of the Hermitage for several years and brings an insider's knowledge of the history of the Hermitage to this very special presentation. A reminder that that's Monday, March 20th, that's a Monday evening. The Mahwah Museum operates largely through our volunteers, our members, sponsors, and donations, and we are always looking for new volunteers. If you would like to be a part of our community, please contact me via the website director@mahwahmuseum.org. Funding has been made possible in part through grant funds administered by the Bergen County Division of Cultural and Historic Affairs, the Department of Parks, through a general operating support grant from the New Jersey Historical Commission, a division of the Department of State. There will be a Q&A session at the end of this today's talk. If you have a question, please raise your hand so I can bring a microphone over to you, because we do have a virtual audience, so they will also be able to hear your question. And for our virtual visitors, attendees, use the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. Most family trees contain more than one member who served in the military. Finding information about their service can expand your understanding of your ancestor, the wars and conflicts that they experienced, and how their service impacted your family. Cathy Moran Hajo is the Vice President and our Archives Director of the museum. She is a historian working at Ramapo College, directing and editing the Papers of Jane Addams as a freely accessible digital edition. Cathy Hajo has a Ph.D. in history from New York University and a BA from Ramapo College. So please welcome today, Cathy Moran Hajo.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, so I just want to say I'm not a professional genealogist. I'm a hobbyist, and I've done a lot of research in my own family tree, and we do a lot of genealogical research at work. I'm also going to focus on American military history right now because it's complicated enough. And if you have military ancestors from other countries, that would be for another day. Let's see how I make this forward. Okay, so we're getting started. I want to talk about just the steps that you can take before you even start delving into records, the ways that you can try to gather information. And I think it's good to get started at home. Maybe you're not sure about which relatives served in the military, but talking to people, talking to living relatives, a grandparent you might know served in the military, but you might find out that their brothers or sisters also did. Trying to find what you've got in the house. There's often, people that can tell you things about the military that you might not find in the records. We're going to find out that the records for military service are pretty spotty. They've been damaged over the years. So you might not be able to find a record, but you might have an oral history that can tell you what's going on. So I also think that it's very important to talk to living veterans and get their stories down. If you are a veteran, get a video camera or phone and record some story, because it will help your descendants to understand your life and your service. So old family photographs are a great way, if you go through them, to make sure that you've captured everything that you can from your own personal family archive. There's often a person in your family that is more into history than the rest of you. If that person is not you, contact that person and try to find out what you can about the photos. These are down the bottom are two of my uncles who served in World War II, and then my dad, who managed to not serve in World War II, and his pictures are much goofier and happy because he was in 1946, he was in the Army. So I think, finding out that kind of stuff, I would not have known that he served if he didn't have these old photos, because he never talked about it. They can help you with the branch of the service that someone served in. They can help you with the years that they served, and get you some experience that, all Army service isn't bad. I mean, I could put up like 17 photos of my father goofing around at a base in Kentucky, and they don't tell me much about service. There's also correspondence. If you've got if you're lucky enough, like I did, my grandfather had these wonderful files that I only found out after my grandmother died, of letters, because my uncle died in World War II, and he's got letters from the chaplain. He's got letters from the mayor of New York sending him condolences. He's got letters from the military telling him where he's buried. He's got all this stuff, but it's only there because he happened to put it in a box and keep it. So there may be stuff, if you've got old family records that are correspondence, you may find if you go through it that there might be military information in them. You might have letters from the government and that kind of thing. These are the best records I've got, of what my grandfather saved, because they're really detailed. They give you a real sense of what was going on. And I don't have that for almost any other members of my family. So family letters back home would be the best. These are my friend's letters. He was cleaning out his house to move, and he found a box of letters that his father sent to his family back from the Korean War. He never knew they were there. His father never talked about it, but his father was a paramedic in the Korean War, and he sends all these letters about what they're doing, and that they're being made to do surgery on prisoners of war, and he's basically a pharmacist. So they were really, they give a real sense of flavor, and he's been reading them and enjoying them. They tell you both the boring stuff that they do every day, but they also give you, kind of an exciting view of what was going on. And they're going to be a little bit censored because they're not going to tell their family everything probably, but this is way more than he ever heard from his father in person. And then there's memorabilia. Some of these were shared with us from Ruth Bristow Portella, and these were her grandmother's uniforms, and we put her in a exhibit on Mahwah women, and she brought these costumes in, and we had a real fun time trying to figure out what she served, what branch she was in, because the uniforms didn't match the service records, but we were able to dig it out eventually and figure out what the uniforms were. And so she also has a load of material. She had her identification card. People sometimes keep swords or medals. My uncle's Purple Heart got stolen out of their house in the Bronx in the 60s, but we still have the plaque for it. And then I included these elephants because these elephants were always in our house when we were kids. And I remember one day we asked what they were from, and we found out that my dad was in the Merchant Marines in World War II before he joined the Army, and he ended up going to India, and then he bought them there. And that's the only, I've still not found a single record that says he was in the Merchant Marines, that he did anything, but I know that he has real ivory from India. And we know that that's, that started the story going. So sometimes the memorabilia might be something that, is Japanese or Korean that they picked up when they were away at the war. And you can find more information about where they were that way. Okay, so the next kind of thing I think is really important, especially if you're going to research multiple veterans, is to try to organize yourself. It's really easy to get bogged down in all the databases that are out there, all the websites that are out there, and it's difficult to try to keep track of what you're looking for each person. So I think coming up with a scheme is a really good plan. So there's ways to do it that you can create like a list of names of all the ancestors who might have been in the military. And that could be almost every man in your family tree, which can be daunting. But set up a system. Once we've gone through this, you'll see there's different ways to search for different wars. There's different kinds of records that are out there based on the time period. So you can think about it as a way of looking at a war and trying to figure out what relatives were in it and gather that information. So you're searching by war, or you can do it by person. You can also do it by these specific record sets. So things like the World War I draft registration cards, which is down in the corner there, are they're a really nice resource. They have tons of people in them, and they've got a lot of information. So that gives you a sense of people, relatives of you who may have been in the war. They're at least drafted. And then there's a lot of computer-based tools that you can use. How many people here use anything like Ancestry or genealogy? Okay, yeah. So these sources it's really difficult, I think, to do good genealogical research now without using them. But you don't necessarily have to use them to build your own family tree and collect your records. You can use them as a resource. There are programs like Family Tree Maker, which is one that sits on your computer, and you can gather information and put it there. The platforms like Ancestry, Find My Past, and there are others, they will let you build the tree online, and you can gather records and store them in that tree. But you have to pay a subscription to do that. You can pay a subscription. You cannot pay a subscription and use the family tree building part, but you can't add records to it. You'd have to manually add the information from the records because you wouldn't be able to see them without the subscription. These resources are available in some libraries. So Ridgewood and Wyckoff both have subscriptions to the Ancestry Library edition. And so you can go there and search the databases, and then you'll be able to get information without necessarily paying for it. They're not cheap. I don't think it's not always a bad thing to jump in for 6 months and do a lot of research and then leave, if you have somewhere to store the information. You can do paper and pen. People have done that for years. You can create folders and binders of each of the veterans and like print out records, and then you'll have that information. So sometimes, I think that the genealogy platforms are great, but they do cost money, and they do expect you to stay on them forever to keep all your records that you've linked. So I think one of the things you want to try to find out, think about is what you're trying to find out when you're doing your research. Are you really just trying to get the details for a relative? Are you trying to, figure out if you can claim benefits? Do you want to join the USAA insurance thing that's advertised all over TV these days? And you have to prove you're the son of a veteran. Or do you want to get a sense of the military tradition of your family, that if it's a long-standing one? You might want to find out of what happened to specific relatives and what their service was like, or get a better sense of the whole military history of the country. So I think they're thinking about the things you're trying to find. There are different records that will help you to do different things. The personal military records are the ones we're going to focus on, but we're also going to look at how you can tell about the stories that people, the experiences that they had. So the things you need to know to be able to do more in-depth research is you need to know the names, and you also need to know variants. Not always the name that might not be the name that they used in the military. This is a discharge record that has a lot of the information that we need for that. But the branch of the military is really important. Those records are kept separately. The Army records and the Navy records are two different things. If you've got their enlistment and discharge dates, that'll help you to narrow down when they served and whether it was for more than one war. Especially people there's people that were in the Spanish-American War and World War I. There are people in World War I and World War II in Korea. So they're not always just one war. If you can find the units that they served in, that will be really helpful in being able to do more research and find out what the experience was like, and ranks that they achieved. And if you can get a serial number, it's great for the more modern records. So all these things, if you can try, you can make your little index card or spreadsheet that has all this information for every one of the veterans, it will help you to search and figure out how to attack the records. So we're going to talk some about the types of records that are out there to be used and what they can tell us. So the one thing I've learned brushing up for this lecture is that the records are different for every war. They are maddeningly available and not available for different conflicts and different time periods. Each branch has their own separate way of keeping records, and that there are a lot of guides out there. So when you do narrow down your focus, so you're just looking to find World War II, you can find a lot of help online to help you to figure out how to do this. So we're going to do a kind of overview of the records that are out there, but every person that you try to research, you're going to have a different experience depending on what was left, whether they happen to be lucky when there was a big fire and burned records, or it's all. I've done research for several different people who are in World War II, and the amount of information I've found is so different for each one that it can be frustrating. But I think you just have to know that going in. And the availability of military records. So only direct relatives of a veteran can get records for 62 years after the event. So we're talking 1961. So if you're looking for Vietnam War records, if you're looking for Gulf War records, you're not going to be able to get them unless you're a direct family member, but then you can apply for them. And after that, if you're next of kin, you can get some limited freedom of information. But basically, we're going to focus today on before Vietnam because that's where the records are accessible. So draft records are some of the really nice ones. World War I was the first war where there were drafts that wasn't like the Civil War drafted people, but it was a tiny percentage. Now, just because you find a draft record does not mean that your relative served in the military. It just means that they registered for the draft. So there are also men who served in the military who don't have draft records because they were already enlisted at the time. So it's, it gives you a really good insight to people who are around and, when the draft came out, but it doesn't necessarily tell you that they served. There's a lot of really good information on these. You've got birth dates, as opposed to things like how old a person is at a certain time. You've got addresses, next of kin. Sometimes you get occupation and where they worked. And the one thing that I love about them is they're almost always written by the veteran themselves. So if you have a veteran with a very common name, and you can then see a signature or see handwriting, and then later on you look at other records and you see that same signature, you can be fairly sure that it's the right person. And so these records end where there's no more conscription after 1972. So draft records, I think, are great to kind of see the potential, the people who might have been in some of the wars in the 20th century. And then there's enlistment records, and enlistment records will tell you when they actually were enlisted in the Army. The National Archives has these up until World War I. And they're microfilmed and you can look at the original documents, but they're indexed on most of these genealogy sites. This is an Ancestry page clip that gives you the kind of information. So you've got, the race, the marital status, the rank, birth year, all that kind of information. There's some information about education, and they don't usually put in the branch yet. They put in this branch material. So those are transcriptions. They're available on almost all of the those genealogical sites like Family Search and Ancestry, and what's the other big one? Can't remember. And then muster rolls are kind of quarterly lists of the enlisted men attached to a specific unit. These ones are a little hard to read. All the muster rolls are a little hard to read because they're from microfilm, most of them. But this one, the top one is from a US Navy ship called the Jeanette. And that one is from 1874. So what they did is every quarter, they would list everybody who's on the ship and what their position was. And then if you can follow those over time, you can see when exactly your ancestor served. So when they joined the ship, when they left, or when they joined the unit. The one below is, I think, World War I. I can't read it, sorry. So they give you that sense of where they were, what unit they were in, and what times they were there. This can help you to then later figure out what that unit did and where your ancestor, what kind of battles or events that took place when they were in part of it. And then there's some travel records. I've mostly seen these for World War I, where they show the ships that the soldiers got on to go over and then to come back. So you have the exact days they left the country and came back. These two have a Mahwah veteran, Joseph Zembrisky. I can't say that. He's on there somewhere. And it says, one thing that we're going to have to do for the Veterans Project is you can actually search for the town name and then go back and find all the pages so we can pull more names out of there. But this will tell you what ship they went on, when they left, when they came back. It helps with the units again and information about ranks. So it's very like nice nitty gritty detail of the days they were there. And then for earlier service, there's a thing called the compiled military service record. What happened with the earlier armies is there were a bunch of different records at the company level, and lists and muster rolls and payrolls and things like that. And when they needed to pay benefits to veterans, they realized they didn't have all the information in one place. So they made these records up by copying information from all the other records. And it lists out when they start, what ranks they are, what units they served in, and it has there's a decent amount of detail on these, but they're all pulled from other records. And then it's mostly for pre-World War I service, and the level of detail is variable. The whole thing is like, everything is variable. You look at one, and it will have like 3 pieces of information. The next one has line after line after line because that company kept better records. And so that more was available on there. Like all these records, not all of them are digitized. The National Archive has a lot of records, and they have not. I mean, I think this is of a high priority for them, but they haven't digitized all of them. So just because you don't find them on an online source doesn't mean that they're not at the archive and still waiting to be found. And now for veterans before 1960, this is where you can ask for a military personnel file. And this is the newer one that replaces that CMSR. And that one you have to fill out a form, then you print it out, then you mail it to the National Archives. They get 4,500 to 5,000 applications a day. So you may wait, but if you have veterans that you want to find more information about, just like spending a day filling out a bunch of these forms and sending them off, they'll be happy surprises when they come in. You know, you'll suddenly get like, oh, here's this one, here's that one. But you do need that information. You need their name, service number, branch, you know, that's kind of thing. They want to know the last date, last assigned unit and things like that, but that's not required. But this is the way to maybe just make a big push if you want to do military research, just try to get as many veterans as you can. So these would be the ones between World War I and 1960. So for some of the earlier wars, there's also pension records. And so it's Revolutionary War, 1812, Civil War. So if you were an officer, disabled, if you were poor, if you died and your orphan or your widow wants a pension, they would fill out an application form to get a pension. And some of them have nice, rich records about the service of the veteran, especially the ones that had passed. So their wife might say, they were involved in these 3 wars, you know, battles, and they did this and they did this, and I have 3 children I need to feed and I have no money. And then they'll fill out the form and hope to get a pension from the government. But sadly, most of the Revolutionary War ones were burned in 1800 and 1812 when the War Department files went on fire. And there are some pension records on some of the genealogy databases, but the National Archive has more of them. So they're nice records. And then there's also death records. There's a couple of different ways that you can find information. It's always easier to find information about veterans who died in a war than it is for ones that served, because they get more news attention. They get sometimes burial in Arlington or places like that, and you find them in monuments. Yeah. Oh yeah. I think I was talking with a cousin of yours. Yeah. Right. Oh, great. Yeah. So like there are plaques that will say the names of veterans that were killed in a specific war in a town. There are monuments like the Vietnam Veterans Monument that has all the names in it. There are also books. This one, The Soldiers of the Great War, has 3 volumes full of people who died. It has the cause of death, it has the hometown. And there's some pictures. There's a few pages of that one where they have photographs, but most of the book doesn't have pictures. Some of these are available online. And you can also find when you search sites like Find a Grave for a veteran, you'll sometimes see that they've put it on the gravestone, that there's mention of the military service. So that helps you to, again, figure out what's there. There's also casualty lists for most of the wars that are digitized. So like the one in the middle there, Joseph Fahey, that's my uncle. So there's a whole catalog roster of World War II dead, so you can find those ones. And then Veterans Graveyard Sites is another database that you can search to find Hilton Navy. All right, so this is the big sad story. So in 1973, the archive that holds most of the records from 1912 to 1964 had a catastrophic fire. 80% of Army records, 75% of Air Force records were destroyed. So it's the big hole that you will find in your research when you're trying to find some of the records from those wars. And they tried to salvage as much as they could. They've tried to reconstruct the content. But if you can't find it, there's a really good chance that that's what happened. And just knowing that will help you to not beat your head up. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, just like that. Right. Yeah. Uh-huh.
That's where I keep on getting stuff.
Mm-hmm.
They keep on claiming it's the fire, which
Mm-hmm.
it's hard to. but people who are they keep on telling records have some someplace else.
Interesting.
I can't find anybody who can tell me anything about
Mhm.
that. I'm sorry. So I can't find anybody who could tell me anything about that.
Yeah, that's interesting because it's the kind of record that they would really like to provide to us. And if they did have them somewhere else, I would really think that they would have put them in an archive and made them accessible. But
Well, and another interesting thing is my father was awarded a Bronze Star in 1966
Mhm.
for his World War II activities. So I guess up until that time, they still had the record. Somehow
right.
they decided retroactively, not retroactively, but, to give him a Bronze Star.
Mhm.
And, but I can't find anything on it.
It happened in 66.
So it may have been destroyed in the fire as well.
Yeah, it's really rough. I mean, almost every genealogy focus that you look at, there'll be a fire somewhere that affects it. You know, like the 1890 census burned. And I do Irish genealogy, and there's records that were in the National Archive building burned during the Civil War. So it's like, it's like there's always going to be a place where when you keep stuff on paper. Mhm. Right. Yeah. Probably, yeah, because that's the time period. So that record center in St. Louis is where they put all the military records, and then, yeah, just got to microfilm everything, right? Yeah. Wow. All right, so that is, yeah, you guys already know about it, the big fire. So I'm never going to go into tips on specific wars, just to give you a sense of the kinds of records that are available. And does anybody have any records from these old colonial wars? My people came here in the 1890s and 1900s. But if you do, they're mostly state-held records because they're mostly state militias that fought against the French and Indian War, King Philip's War. But so you won't go to the National Archives for that because they weren't part of the United States at that point. So you'd be going to state archives to look for records on that. The New York Public Library has a lot of information on this. They have a really good genealogy center if you haven't tried it. And they have on microfilm things that they don't have in person. So those records are kind of, they're a little sketchy, but you can find them if you're tenacious enough. And then the Revolutionary War, I think, is better documented. There's still a lot of state militias. There's 3 different armies that were involved. So depending on that, you might still go to state archives to find records about ancestors. Most of it has been digitized, but then there's the War Department files. So some of those were lost before they digitized. And there's a lot of this information available on genealogy platforms because people have such interest in the Revolutionary War and their old records. So they were kind of done early. So you can get the pension records, some of them. You can get land grant records when soldiers would get a land grant for having served in the Revolutionary War. And there are a lot of guides out there. There's a lot of histories of the war. Like we have one upstairs, the Revolutionary War in Bergen County. So if you can get that sense of what unit your ancestor was in, you can find information about those battles. You can find more information about the stories. And like I said, there are a lot of guides. So if you've got that going on, I think that's a good place to just kind of helps you step through the best ways to find it. And then the War of 1812. This one had a much larger naval presence. There are records. There are these CMSRs for Army and Navy. And there's this one book. It's not a big book, but the genealogy for the War of 1812 that will help you find tactics for how to find them. There's also, again, state level records. So the one thing that comes up a lot in the earlier wars is that a lot of the records are held at the state, not at the National Archives. Okay, so the Civil War, over 2.8 million served. So there's going to be a ton of records available. There is a National Park Service database that has a list of all the soldiers and sailors that they know of. But a lot of them are limited information. They might have like J. Smith from Georgia. And like that's all they've got. So it's difficult to be 100% sure that it's your person. But you can, if you can find your individual, you'll get the regiment unit, and sometimes you'll get the list of battles that they participated in. So the National Archive has the Union records, but they do not have the Confederate records because they lost. So those records are at the state archives of each of the southern states. So depending on where your ancestor came from, you're going to, you'll be looking in different places. And there are a lot of records about prisoners of war. There's some information about units. Let's see what this one is. This is there are some archival collections from a unit in the Army. So depending if you get lucky and yours happens to be the one that there's more records available for, you'll be able to dig into that. And there are state level registers of people so that the towns had to provide a certain number of people for a quota to serve in the war. So there's sometimes lists in the town archives and records of who those people were. All right, the Spanish-American War. The CMSRs are available for this one. They're not destroyed, as far as I know. And there are some indexes to service records. For some reason, this one has more digitized stuff that looks really nice and isn't microfilmed when you find it. They're actually photographs of the records instead of microfilms. So there are some genealogy services out there. I think this one is interesting because of it happens after immigration. So you actually get a sense of new immigrants coming in and immediately going in to serve in the Spanish-American War. Okay, so World War I is the first one where we have the 73 fire impacting it. There's a great tip in the 1930 census, so that if you are looking at somebody who survived the war in the 1930 census, all the way at the end of the record, you can see there's like, if you look at the yellow one, there's a column that says, are you a veteran? Yes or no. And then after it'll ask you what war you served in. So it might say, WW for World War, or it might say SP or something for Spanish-American War, or it could even say Civil War. So that's a way, if you haven't been able to find records, that you can tell that an ancestor served in a war. So it's nice to, kind of go through that census and check off all your people and see who were veterans. So the 40 census has it as well, or the 50 census, but it's like an optional question. They only ask like a small percentage of the people, so it's not as helpful, but this one is really good. So there are draft records for this war. Again, there's enlistment records, muster rolls, travel records that document the travel. So this one's fairly well documented. And the Red Cross has a whole database online of places where you can find prisoner of war. So if your ancestor was captured, they should be in that database. Some of the other things I'm going to talk about later, but you can find newspaper coverage of this one as well. So for World War II, again, the fire. And I already said the 50 census talks about the war service, but it's not it's a supplemental question. I just got asked supplemental questions for the 2020 census, and I was so excited. It's like I get to answer all these extra questions. And so all these records are not available online yet. They're at the NPCPC in St. Louis if they're still there. But you can get most of the stuff on the websites. They've got casualty lists. There's some hospital records that are kind of cool. And there's a lot more oral histories because people have told their stories, so there's like research guides on how to find people, but there's also many more videos and things of veterans. So the Korean War, again, 1973 fire. These records are mostly, from what I've seen on casualty lists and prisoner of war. They don't have a lot of the kind of registration lists and draft records and things like that. There are muster rolls for the Navy, but not the Army. And there are some groups building resources. There's this site here is a place where Korean War veterans are building their own, kind of talking about unit histories and kind of getting together and documenting things and putting in materials that they've got. There's some of these memorials. You can check out the names that are on those if you're not sure. And I think that the more moderns the war get, the more likely are you might find some materials. You might find some people who are still alive who might remember an ancestor. So the Vietnam War, They say that records from 1960 on are publicly accessible, but there really aren't a lot of old Vietnam War records out there online or available from the archives either. So they might, even though they say that you can get them from before 1961, I found very little records that you can access online. But I did find that newspapers are actually a really good source for this one, because they talk about people going over, people sending letters back, telling everybody what's going on. So there's a lot more coverage in the newspaper. I think maybe because there are fewer people over there. I mean, World War II, it's like everyone's over there. So they're not going to cover every letter someone sends home. There are a lot of videos and photographs and maps and things on the National Archives site. And I think if you have a Vietnam veteran, you should, again, try to record them, get information about what they saw, what they remember, because I think that's the kind of stuff that's going to make it really rich history for as we go forward. All right, so here's how to transition from finding facts to trying to get stories. That's my uncle. He's still alive. He was in World War II. Yeah. That was him and my mom trying to talk about the war, and he didn't want, I don't remember anything. It's like, we're a little too late. He's 93. So one of the best things you can do if you have a unit and a regiment that you know that your relative is in is look for the regimental histories that will tell you what happened. Depending on the books, I mean, there's a wide variety of them, but this one, the 305th Infantry in World War II, has lists of the soldiers, has lists of the people who died. It has the officers. They kind of go through what they did every month and where they were, what battles they were in. So this kind of stuff can really fill out the story that you're trying to understand about the service. Because most of the military records are just going to say they started here, they went here, they did this. It's not color, it's not the story. The best place to find these right now, you can look in major library catalogs like WorldCat, but those online book databases, Google Books, HathiTrust, and the Internet Archive have a lot of digitized old books from libraries that you can use to, to kind of find them. You do need to dig. I mean, if you have the unit name, usually it will help. But if you're just trying to find like people that were in a specific battle and what they knew about it, it's going to be hard. There's also used booksellers. There's one called ABE. I don't know what it stands for. Something Book Exchange. But they have old used books. So sometimes if you find a book exists and you can't get access to it, you can try looking to see if you can buy them. They're never going to be very expensive. There also could be stories that people have written down that were never published, an oral history or just a manuscript somebody wrote. And if you search again for unit names and wars, you can find them in archives. There's a site called Archive Grid that searches a lot of archives. If you put in something like a unit name, you might find that there's a person who served. I mean, it might be that they served in 1980 and they give their records, and your guys from the 40s. But you can try. It's something. Once you can find something like this, they're really rich and they're really helpful to getting a sense of the experience. And then there's like kind of memoirs and histories of battles. If you know that your ancestor was in a battle, I know my uncle died in the Battle of the Bulge in Luxembourg, and I know the date. So, I can find a history of that. I can find out, what happened. I can try to figure out where he was. But if they didn't, and they're in a, you may not be able to find as much. But there are these memoirs that people have written. There's more of them out there than you think. I think starting in I'm thinking World War II is where I see the real explosion of them. But there are some for the Civil War, there are some for World War I. But I think World War I, people were just a little like, they didn't want to talk about it. And in World War II, it seems a little bit, you get more books out there where someone will tell what they were. So if your ancestor was a fighter pilot and you can't find any records, reading a book of another fighter pilot's experiences, it gives you that sense of what it was like. And looking for the names of the officers, if you can find them, who were in charge of the units. They often are the ones who write the memoirs. The soldiers don't always do it, but the officer might. So this Memories of the Civil War, I think that's a gathering of stories, but it's the kind of thing where you can really, if you can find the names of their captains, you can search for them, and then they might have records. They're more likely to have done it. And then oral histories, I think I might have a whole slide on that, but you can find recordings for different wars where people tell their experiences. Okay, there's also the U.S. Army Center for Military History. They have what they call lineage and honors for different units. So if you find your unit name, this is the 11th Engineer Battalion's unit. It has information. They were constituted on March 19th, 1917. They tell you like all the dates that things happened. And then the second page was a different part of the website that tells you which campaigns they were in. So that will give you, again, if you know your person was in that unit and you have the dates, you can say, okay, they were in the Ardennes in Alsace in World War II. So that helps you to, again, find more information about the battles and about the things that they did. And then we have Navy cruise books. I actually brought my other uncle's. He was on the Saratoga. It's sitting right there if anyone wants to look at it later. But these books were published by a ship's crew that kind of talk about the deployment and the cruise. And so there are different ones for different dates. These are some I found on the internet on the bottom. My other uncle, the one who's still alive, was on the New Jersey. So this is that's a war log from there. There's some that are very new. The last arrived, the Kitty Hawk. So these are available on genealogy sites. You can also get them. There's a website that has, you can look at them online. And if you want, you can buy a printed out copy from one of them for like $15. So they're kind of cool. And they're full of pictures. I think the one, I don't think we found any pictures of my uncle and the one that I have back there, but they're a neat kind of thing that's just Navy. Okay, so I started looking at YouTube and there are tons and tons of interviews of veterans out there. It goes back from the World War I and forward. So again, you might not find your ancestor being interviewed, but definitely look, because there's lots of projects where people interview veterans for school projects, for library projects, for projects like the Mahwah Veterans Project that we started. And they're out there, they're putting them on the web, even if they used to be filmed and videotape. But you can find, if you can find people that served in the same place, the same time, you can get, again, that sense of what happened and what it was like. This guy in the corner was at the Battle of Luxembourg. I didn't listen to this yet, but I bookmarked it. I'm going to listen to it soon. And again, I can't say strongly enough to interview the living veterans. Trying to get stories out of people after they're really old is difficult. But if you can get them a little newer, and sometimes people don't want to talk, but they're kind of prompts that you can give to make it a little bit more of a conversation. And you don't have to get everything, but just getting something, it fills those kind of blanks where you really don't understand what things were like. And then the newspapers. We have like a lot of newspapers that are digitized now. And this one is really funny. I don't know this guy, Gene Kaunacki, but he says, maybe I'm slipping, but 4 weeks in the Army and I still haven't made a general yet. But give me time. I've never known the democratic side of life until mustered into the Army. There's only one level here. In Company 1, there is a garbage collector, a circus clown, a lawyer, a mineralogist, and a crab peddler. And in my tent is a mechanical engineer, a zoologist, a writer, street cleaner, and a grease monkey. So it's like he sent letters home and they published it in the local paper, and they're funny. But there's also stories about, people who've just finished training. So you get a sense. Here's Edward Soa, has recently completed a 21-9 ordnance calibration technician. And he's, they tell you units that they're in. There's a Krinsky there, Harold Krinsky, who was wounded in action and is recovering from his wounds. So these will give you that detail. They'll tell you things that were happening. They'll give you the unit name usually. We do have, I have a newspapers.com subscription, and sometimes, we just use it at the museum to look up people. So it's like $100 a year, but you can get it for a year and really pound it for stories, and you can just, download all the clippings. But these kind of things really give detail, and they're digitizing more and more newspapers. When they first started, there weren't very many that covered New Jersey, but now they're really starting to add more. So it makes it really, livens up the stories and gives you, I would love for this guy to be my relative because he looks really funny. The other thing you can do is tell story. You can find out about the battles. So you can look at the battles. These clippings I pulled were from the day after my uncle died. So I'm assuming that that's kind of describing what was going on, and it looks like things were bad. It's like, so the national newspapers can give you that sense of how the battles are going, where they are. And if you have specific dates where things happened or where where your ancestor was, it also gives you a sense of what it felt like from the other side, like from the parents and the wives and stuff, reading these papers every day and trying to figure out what's going on with their family members. So I think these are also really helpful for getting that nitty gritty story stuff. There's also Stars and Stripes magazine, which is a magazine that was, or a newspaper that was sent to the soldiers. And it was news for soldiers, so it had stories about regular news events, but it also had a lot of stories about what was going on in the war. So there are, it's still operating, I believe, yes. So Ancestry has 1945 to 63 available, so you can look that up. But it was published it was published first in the Civil War, but it's a tiny little unit of soldiers that were doing it because they found a printing press. And then they published in World War I, and then it came back in World War II, and it's been going, I think, pretty much since then. Now, as you go on, there's a lot of information. There's so many websites now and so many museums that are devoted to military units that once you've got that information about where they served and what they did, you can, start to branch out and find more information about it. So Wikipedia is actually really good for finding, if you put in a unit name, there'll be a lot of references to other places, to other sources that they've used. It might be a veterans group. It might be, one of those regional or regimental histories. So I think that those, like looking there for a unit and trying to look at its history and then looking at the sources is a good way to help with that. But there's a lot out there. There are Facebook groups for specific regiments during wars. There are museums, like this is the Saratoga has its own museum, which the ships my uncles were on. There's ones for specific war veterans. There's so you can get lost in all this, which I think is why you want to focus on that organization. If you're going to, power through one person, start listing all the places that you can look and then just checking them off as you go. Because one of the things that gets very distracting is not being sure if you looked in a place for somebody or not. So I think tracking where you've looked, making sure that, did I check all these 10 records that are on this database? Did I check these websites? And just keeping that list of where you looked and where you found and what you haven't. It helps you to organize all this. There's also veteran organizations and memorials. Chapters of the VFW, the American Legion, the Vietnam Veterans of America. They may have information about a member of the association that, maybe have passed on by now, but they also, might be a good place to talk to see if they have information about people that are from a specific town. And the memorial plaques are also really useful to figure out people that have passed away. This one is from Atlantic City, and it's got World War II veterans. So if your person was in the American Revolution, which none of mine were, there are these lineage societies, and I think they basically are genealogists who want to trace their roots back to the Revolutionary War. So if you've got people back that far and you're doing a family tree, you might all of a sudden hit a person, and then you'll find all the tracings that go all the way back to a soldier in the Revolutionary War. There's the daughters of the American Revolution, the sons of the American Revolution, and then there's the daughters of the War of 1812. They have databases, and those databases you can pump in a name and see if that person was in the Revolutionary War. And if they were, then you can usually, those lineages they're printed in books. They're also on websites. So if you can get from present day to that lowest ancestor that they might have done, then you can just kind of use their work to get all the way back to the Revolutionary War. All right, and so there's resources. All right, so Fold 3 is owned by Ancestry.com, and it is where they focus most of their military records. I'm really annoyed that Ancestry.com decided to make a second website of military records to charge you more money to use that one, because you kind of need both. So this is the one I'd be like, yeah, go find a library that has it and use that one. It's $80 a year, which isn't as much as an Ancestry subscription, but you can do a 7-day trial, which I would highly recommend, getting everything organized and do the 7-day trial. Get as much as you can and then leave. You can see without becoming a member whether there are results, but they're very tricky and hard to tell. Like, if you're looking, my other grandfather's Edward Moran, he was in the Navy in World War I. Well, there's like 700 of them, and I can't tell which one without looking at the record. I can't tell which one is which. So it's not helpful. It also has some other English-speaking countries. So it's got Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom records from those wars. So it's kind of, that part of it's good. Museum also has a subscription right now to that. So if anyone wants, can come over here and use ours. It also has a memorial section where families contribute stuff. This is kind of like if you use ancestry.com, people put their own family trees up. Here's people putting up stories of their ancestors who were in the military. So it's kind of a nice way to see, material that someone might have, it's more narrative. It'll tell you a story. It also has histories of the Civil War, regiments and battle histories, which will give you that kind of information that you're looking for. The one thing I dislike intensely about Fold 3 is that it focuses on war. So you're trying to find a person, you have to go to the war and then try to find the person within the war. And sometimes it doesn't work as well as just searching for a person and, saying, I know he was in the, this war. It also doesn't help when your ancestor might have been in the military, but wasn't in a war, because the whole thing is organized by conflict. So I think, I don't love its search. But if you do have a Fold 3 account and an Ancestry account, and you find someone like my uncle on the Saratoga, you can just click a button and save it to your family tree on Ancestry, which is nice, but not worth $80 a year. So Ancestry is the bigger service that has 30 billion records from 80 countries, they say, but most of them are English speaking. And they have a large collection of military records that have a lot of the same things as in Fold 3, draft muster rolls. They've got the census where you can look up the service in the war. And you can search for a person and you can find everything about the person. You can limit it to just the military record and then see what they have in the military, but it's not, I find the search much easier. It's easier to dial in on the specific person. If you know they were born in 1890 and they lived in Brooklyn and they did this and that and this, it helps to narrow the search and make it easier. It just said that, but it doesn't have the same, all the military records that Fold 3 has. It has some, which, it's weird. Either you put them all over there or you put some over there, but they want you to buy both. And they figured out how. Now, Family Search is a free genealogy site that's run by the Church of Latter-day Saints. You have to subscribe to use it, but it's free. And they have war records too. They have more of the common, I would say, there's very few records Family Search has that Ancestry doesn't have and Fold 3 doesn't have. But if you don't want to pay for those, you can go on here and get some of the enlistment records and the draft records. They're basically getting things from the National Archives. And this one does allow you to search mostly by the biography and then filter for military. So you can, if you can see down there, it says kind of, I've just filtered for the World War II Army enlistment records and the registration cards and prisoners of war. So that I can click on the records I want to see, and then it will show only the people that match those records. And then your state archive, depending on where your ancestor's from, can have a lot of military records in it. Some of the state archives, like New Jersey's doesn't have the best website, but some states have really detailed and good ones. This is a New York State Korean War reference page, and it has information about the battles. It has information about the people. It has unit histories for some of them that were for the New York units. So I think, depending on where your person lived when they entered the war, you can look to those state records for more information. Now, the National Archives in Washington has the records from Revolutionary War to 1912. And so that's not everything's digitized, but a lot has been. You can go on their website, look up the records and try to dig through it. You can also go there and talk to the genealogy people there. They have a lot of guides on how to find things in their records, but it is a slog. And but if you're, if the records aren't digitized and you've got someone from one of these older wars, that's where you go. Now the branches and the, this building is the St. Louis building. This is a new building from the one that burned. But this has World War I to the present. So again, things that aren't digitized, if you want more details, you may have to go to St. Louis. And there are also National Archives branches that are spotted all around the country. The closest one to us is in New York City, and it has records that are in the region. So they'll have microfilm of records that might deal with New York and New Jersey, and probably Pennsylvania. So you can do, but all these places have websites. You can like kind of check before. You can email the people that work there and tell them what you're looking for, and they can give you a better sense of whether they have it or not. I have a friend that works in the St. Louis building, and he's been digitizing draft cards, or you know, 'cause he's every once in a while he sends people, I've just digitized Benny Goodman's card, you know, and he like puts them up on Facebook. So they're working on digitizing the stuff that they have that didn't burn, and putting it up. But it's a slow process. So the New Jersey State Archives also has military records, and they have, again, the earlier stuff and the stuff that's very specifically New Jersey related. So they've got information about, you know, in World War I, the units came from neighborhoods and states, and then they started mixing them up because they didn't want when entire units got beat, they didn't want the whole town to lose their sons. So those records are at the state archives and at other state archives. All right, and the New York Public Library, I think I said, they have this fabulous local history and genealogy department. That's, you know, honestly, that's a really good place to go if you're having trouble. You know, go there, talk to their reference librarians, and they might say, these are the places you want to look at the National Archives. This is where they know how to do this stuff. They also have a big microfilm collection. I know everybody hates microfilm, but until they digitize it, that's what we have. So it's pretty helpful. And then there is the Library of Congress Veterans History Project. This one collects oral histories and memoirs from veterans from World War I. And they have published a series of books. So they'll have, like, you know, veterans' voices from World War II. They might talk about the Navy. They might talk about different, you know, sea battles. But they base it on telling stories using the veterans' voices. So you might or might not find your actual relatives having participated in these oral histories, but you again can get these sense of what it was like to be there and what the action was like. I think they also have been gathering documents, like people will send them diaries and they'll send them other kinds of materials that the veterans have. And this site was kind of our inspiration for doing the Mahwah Veterans Project. So this was a COVID thing. We started it during COVID because we could do it remotely. And it's volunteer, so it's going slowly. But the idea was we had a website that listed Civil War and American Revolution veterans on it that had been built by someone else who had gathered the information a long time ago. And we're like, we don't even know the names of our soldiers from World War I or World War II or any of these. So we started trying to figure out, let's try to gather those names. And, you know, first it was like, let's put it on the website, but then we're like, well, maybe we can do more than that. So we're trying to build a biographical database of each veteran that we can find. And it's not that easy to find them. There aren't you can't just like get a list of every veteran from Mahwah. It's not, it takes a lot of work. But so what we've done is we've gone to the archives in the museum. We've looked at census records. We've looked at when the VFW was here, they had a big plaque of World War II veterans. So we copied all those names down. And then we're trying now to build it out and get more information from the people in town. So I've had a couple of Ramapo College students work on it where they've tried to research people, got pictures, found newspaper articles, and then we have a couple of interviews that we were able to do with some living veterans. So this is a project. I brought my laptop back there that we can, if you want to look at it. We know it's not complete. We know it's really not complete. So if you know the names of veterans, even if you just give us a name, we can start to do research on them, add them to the site, and build it out. All right, that is the end of my talk, except for the question and answer part. So I'd like to thank the people who have helped me to get this thing together too.
I think we know that we have some Q&A, not right now, on the. Okay.
I have one Q&A that came in on an email, and she asked me if her relative was serving in the military before World War I broke out. She's found other people's draft cards that have all this great info, but she can't find the one for the guy who was in the military, and she will not find that because those records he didn't get drafted because he was already in the military. So there's not going to be one of those for him, which is sad. Yeah.
I wonder if you could not comment so specifically, but comment generally on sites and sources that you find that might be suspect, like Stars and Stripes, for example, which had a responsibility to inform soldiers, but also had a responsibility not to break morale
Right.
and not to give information that would be damaging.
Yeah, so Stars and Stripes gives you a sense of what the veterans are seeing. It doesn't give you a sense of what was really happening necessarily. It gives you that kind of culture of the military. But yeah, it's the same with every source. You've got to look at who created it, what their purpose was, what their, I mean, things like a draft record is pretty much factual, unless that tells a different story about when they were born. But when you get to every oral history has one person's perspective, and they might be negative, it might be positive. So you have to weigh them by looking at other sources and see, does Stars and Stripes tell a completely different story than the New York Times tells about a battle? If it does, I think we trust the Times better because we know Stars and Stripes has an agenda. So it's that kind of like evaluate the source and try to think about, who built it, why'd they make it, what are they trying to get us to think? And you have to, that's the whole historian part where I trust you.
This question is from Betsy. Does the Mahwah Project want long-term residents of Mahwah, even if they weren't born here?
Yes, we're being very, very inclusive with the Mahwah Veterans Project. So if you lived here, if you were born here, it doesn't matter. Anyone that has a connection, we want them. And we're also looking for people who want to help with this project. All right. Thank you very much.